So, when World War I kicked off, the general idea was, well, that it would be quick.
Oh, absolutely. The classic home by Christmas thinking.
Exactly. A fast, decisive war. Instead, the whole thing just froze. It became a complete stalemate.
That's right. And it froze in these massive lines of ditches dug right into the ground. We're talking about the trenches of the Western Front.
And that's what we're looking at today. What these defenses were, why they were there, and, what it was actually like to live in them.
For 4 straight years, it completely changed how war was fought.
Okay, so let's start with just the geography, the sheer size of this thing. How far did this line of trenches actually stretch?
It's almost hard to picture. We're talking about a line of fortified trenches that ran for about 450 miles.
450 miles.
Yeah. Imagine starting at the coast of Belgium and drawing a line all the way down to the Swiss border. It basically cut Europe in two.
And I'm guessing the land wasn't all the same across that distance.
Not at all. Up north, you had these flat, wet fields that were always flooding. Further south, it got hilly, even forested. So soldiers were constantly having to adapt how they built things,
All while being shot at, I assume.
all while being shot at. And this was thousands of hours of just back-breaking manual labor.
So how did they even do it? You can't just stand up and start digging.
No, they used a method called sapping. It's really slow. Basically, they dig at the end of an existing trench, extending it forward, usually at night, just one shovel full at a time.
Wow. And the trenches themselves, they weren't just simple ditzes, right? There was a kind of standard
A
design.
very specific design. Most were about 7 feet deep.
So deep enough to stand up in without getting your head shot off.
Exactly. And about 6 feet wide, which is just enough room for men with all their gear to pass each other.
Yeah.
But the walls were always collapsing.
Because of the rain and the mud?
Right. So they had to reinforce them constantly with wooden planks, wire mesh, and just mountains of sandbags.
And you mentioned the water. Digging a 7-foot hole in northern France sounds like a recipe for a swamp.
It was a huge, huge problem. To deal with the mud and water, they laid wooden planks on the floor. They called them duckboards.
They're duckboards.
Yeah. Without them, you'd just be standing, sometimes knee-deep, in this cold, filthy water all day long.
And for the actual fighting, there was a specific feature for that, wasn't there? The fire step.
Precisely. The fire step was just a little ledge carved into the front wall. You'd step up on it to see over the top and rest your rifle on the sandbags.
Now, here's a detail I find fascinating. The trenches were never dug in straight lines. They were always in a zigzag pattern.
Yes, and that was a crucial, life-saving design choice.
Why, though? I mean, wouldn't a straight line be way easier to dig?
It would, but it would also be a death trap. See, if an enemy soldier got into one end of a straight trench,
No, I see. They could just fire straight down the entire length.
exactly, they could wipe out dozens, maybe hundreds of men in seconds. The zigzag pattern meant they could only see a few yards ahead to the next corner. It contained the threat.
So the whole thing is built for defense. But what was a normal day like for a soldier inside this muddy fortress? It sounds like more waiting than fighting.
It was almost all waiting. A soldier might spend a few days in the front line, which was the most dangerous, then rotate back to a support trench, and then a reserve trench.
But that time on the front line, what did that look like?
Well, the day always began before dawn with the morning stand to.
The stand to.
Yeah, it was a period of high alert. Everyone on the fire step, weapons ready, because dawn was a common time for an attack. After about an hour, if nothing happened, the day settled into, well, extreme boredom.
And that boredom was filled with work, right? Constant repairs.
Constant work, fixing walls, pumping out water, cleaning weapons that were always getting clogged with mud. Food was not great, usually cold canned meat and these rock-hard biscuits.
And what about something as basic as clean drinking water?
Scarce. And when you got it, it was often brought up to the front in old petrol cans.
Oh, no.
So your water often tasted and smelled like gasoline. Just another one of the small, constant miseries.
Let's shift to the other threats. Not the enemy, but the environment itself. What was trying to kill you besides the bullets?
Well, the first thing was the water. Standing in that cold, muddy water for days caused trench foot.
Which is what exactly?
It's when your feet go numb and swell up from the cold and wet. They could get infected, turn gangrenous.
Yeah.
Soldiers lost feet to it. It was a serious, debilitating condition.
And I imagine the trenches were not clean. There must have been pests.
Pests on a scale you can't even imagine. Rats grew huge, feeding on scraps and other things. And lice were everywhere.
Lice.
Millions of them, living in the seams of the uniforms. They caused this constant maddening itching. and also spread a disease called trench fever.
So on top of everything else, you're sick with a high fever.
High fever, headaches, terrible pain. And then there was just the smell. You can't forget the smell.
What kind of smell are we talking about?
It was just this overwhelming mix of everything. Waste, stagnant water, rotting sandbags, unwashed bodies, smoke from explosions, and the chemicals they used to try and fight the decay. It was overpowering.
Okay, so that's life inside the trench. What about the area outside, the space between the two armies, no man's land?
No Man's Land was, well, it was basically the surface of the moon. It was a completely dead landscape.
How wide was
It
it?
really varied, sometimes just a few dozen yards, other times several hundred. But it was just a sea of mud, water-filled craters from artillery shells, and massive tangled webs of barbed wire.
So trying to cross it in the daytime was just impossible.
Completely suicidal. The moment you stood up, you'd be cut down by machine gun fire. The only movement was at night, when small patrols would sneak out to repair their wire or try to scout the enemy line.
Which brings us to the weapons. That's what created the stalemate. It wasn't just rifles anymore.
No. The standard soldier had a good bolt-action rifle, sure, but the queen of the battlefield, the weapon that defined trench warfare, was the machine gun.
Because it could fire so fast.
Hundreds of rounds a minute. It created a literal wall of lead that made walking, let alone running, across open ground impossible.
But the biggest killer wasn't even the machine gun, was it?
No. The numbers are pretty clear on this. The biggest killer was artillery.
The massive cannons miles behind the lines.
Exactly. Firing huge explosive shells that would just rain down randomly and constantly. They were responsible for the majority of all casualties.
And for close-up fighting, if you did manage to get into an enemy trench.
Then you're using hand grenades and mortars. And of course, this is when poison gas was introduced. A terrible new weapon that forced every soldier to carry a gas mask everywhere.
So with all this defensive firepower, the strategy had to change completely.
It did. The goal wasn't to advance. It was just to hold, to not lose ground. They built multiple lines of trenches, front, support, reserve, so if one fell, they could fall back.
And the main defense was that barbed wire.
That wire was everything. It was designed to slow down attackers, to hold them in place in no man's land, where the machine guns could do their work.
And sometimes they even went underground, right? Digging tunnels.
Yes, digging tunnels under no man's land to plant huge mines beneath the enemy trenches. But ultimately, because no one could break through, the strategy became one of attrition.
Attrition? It sounds so clinical. What does it actually mean?
It means you stop trying for a clever victory. Your goal is simply to kill more of the enemy than they kill of you. You're trying to wear them down, to bleed their country of soldiers and resources. It's a horrifying strategy.
And to sustain that, the logistics must have been a nightmare.
A complete nightmare. Getting food, water, and especially ammunition to the front was a constant battle, and communication was almost impossible.
Why? They had telephones, didn't they?
They did, but the telephone wires would be laid across the ground. An artillery shell would explode, and poof, the line is cut. It would happen minutes after being repaired.
So how did you send a message?
You use a runner. A soldier whose job was to run by hand with a written message from one part of the trench to another, often across open ground. It was an incredibly dangerous job.
And moving all the heavy supplies?
Far behind the lines, you had railways and roads. But up near the front, in the mud, trucks were useless. They relied on horses and mules. Old technology was still essential.
Let's talk about the human cost. Not just the physical injuries, but the psychological impact of living like this.
It was devastating. The constant deafening noise of the artillery, sometimes for days on end, led to a condition called shell shock.
What were the symptoms of that?
Uncontrollable shaking, memory loss, and inability to speak or move. We would now call it severe PTSD, but at the time, it was poorly understood.
And how did soldiers cope with the daily fear, seeing their friends die?
The main thing that kept them going was the bond with the men next to them. Comradeship. You weren't just fighting for your country anymore, you were fighting to not let down the guy in the trench with you.
And if you were wounded, getting help was another dangerous journey.
A terrifying one. Stretcher bearers had to go out under fire to bring the wounded back to a first aid post. From there, it was a long chain of evacuation to bigger hospitals.
What kinds of injuries were most common?
Because of the artillery, most injuries were from shrapnel. Those are jagged, dirty pieces of metal from the exploding shells. They caused terrible wounds that got infected very easily.
But the war did lead to some medical progress, didn't it?
It did, out of sheer necessity. Doctors and surgeons developed much better techniques for blood transfusions and for setting complex broken bones. Medical science had to advance at a shocking pace.
So after 4 years of this static hell, how did it finally end? How did they break the stalemate?
The breakthrough finally came in late 1918, mostly thanks to a new piece of technology, something that could solve the two biggest problems, barbed wire and the machine gun.
You're talking about the tank.
The tank.
Yeah.
Exactly. These armored machines could roll right over the mud of no man's land, they could crush the barbed wire, and they could protect soldiers walking behind them from the machine gun fire.
And that, combined with better tactics, finally got the armies moving again.
It did. They learned how to coordinate the tanks with airplanes and artillery. The German lines finally broke, and the war shifted back to mobile warfare for the last few months.
And then the armistice. But the lessons from this kind of combat, they shaped military thinking for a long time after.
For decades, the trenches showed just how powerful modern defensive weapons had become. It was a place of unbelievable struggle, where you were fighting the environment just as much as the enemy.
It makes you think. The whole stalemate was basically because a message carried by a runner or horse was slower than a machine gun's bullet.
Right.
It makes you wonder, what stalemates do we have today because our communication or our technology is just a step too slow for the problem we're trying to solve?
That's a great question to think about.
Good luck with your studies.